Good morning, everyone. This is Julie Duffield from Schools Moving Up here at WestEd. Schools Moving Up is also an initiative of the California Comprehensive Center. We're very excited that you could take time out of your busy schedule to be with us today for the Common Core Standards, Integrating Local Accountability in a Comprehensive Assessment System. And before I hand it over to our wonderful presenters today, I just want to review and preview some of the housekeeping that we went over. For those of you who have just joined us, we were reviewing the quick polling, which is a button on the far right-hand side of the screen where you can type in and check a quick check to let us know that you have sound. We'll be using this tool to get some of your immediate feedback during the presentation. So if you can hear me, please hit the check button now so we know that folks have sound. If for any reason, we also will be doing polling via multiple choice. We practiced with the Leap Day one. We'll soon be doing that poll by collecting a little bit more about your role. We'll have an open response where a form will replace the slide and you can type in your questions and comments at selected times during the presentation, during our break time. We'll be monitoring the chat. We really encourage you to use the chat to reflect and share your own experiences as well as ask questions. For those of you who are just joining via the teleconference with the PDF of the PowerPoint that was sent yesterday, event help, you can send a question to eventhelp@wested.org or eventquestion@wested.org, and we'll be monitoring that email. If you're having any problems getting into the webinar now, please send a question to eventhelp@wested.org, and we'll send you the PDF so you can follow along and be part of the conversation without any further interruption. What I would like you to do, if you haven't already done so, is to practice using the chat if you just joined us by typing an introduction, title, and state. And you'll see that on the far left-hand side of your screen, it'll say main room. And in the white window, you type in the introduction and hit return. For those of you who just joined us, we'd like to do some quick roll polling. And there's a multiple choice that should be on your screen. So please just select the one which best describes you. And if you haven't already done so, you can hit other and type it in the chat. We'll give you 30 seconds to do this. Thank you. So folks are introducing themselves in the chat. Thank you. Educational consultant. Thank you, Kathy. Consultant in Department of Education, thank you. Instructional technologist, thank you. So there's some other. I'm just going to publish that poll now. So if you haven't already submitted your choice in the poll above, please select one of those choices now and hit the submit button. So our presenters, you can see that we have lots of district administrators seem to be lots of folks on district administrators, then followed by school site administrators, and then many in the other category. And we have some researchers on as county office and technical support providers. So thank you, everybody, for doing that. Now, one more quick poll. This is one of those open responses. So on your, actually, it's not, it's another multiple choice. What we'd like you to do is to let us know if you've had a chance to use some of these websites. That's the commoncorestandards.org website. If you can check any of that apply. So if you could just let us know which of these resources that you're familiar with. Are you already in process of aligning your curriculum to the Common Core standards? Thank you. So I'm going to publish that now. So if you haven't already submitted your choices, this really helps our presenters to just see how much different knowledge is in the room about these resources. Wow. So most folks have visited the Common Core Standards websites and the PARCC and the Smarter Balance, as well as most of the people on this call have said they are already in the process of aligning their curriculum. That's really exciting. Thank you. And one more quick poll here. we want to know what assessment consortium is your state in. So could you please respond to the final poll there? Thank you, everyone. I'm going to publish that now. The presenters can see that a lot of folks are with the PAC, and then we have the Smarter Balance, and some are in both. And some, 15% have said they're not sure yet and don't know. So thank you so much. So without any further ado, I'm on slide 9, and I'm going to hand over to our host for today, Joe Sasson, who's the Director of Integrated Services here at WestEd. So Joe, over to you for introductions.
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. I am actually calling in from Phoenix, Arizona, and we're having some great weather here today. And thank you for joining our webinar today. So I'd just like to introduce you to our presenters. Bob Rosenfeld, he's the Associate Director of our Local Accountability and Professional Series. And then Liz Jameson is a Senior Program Associate who does a lot of work around the country with schools and school districts with Common Core. And Lynn Spiller, she's the Director of Research and Evaluation at the Creighton School District in Phoenix, Arizona. And Assessment Technology Incorporated, Jason Feld, he's the Vice President for Corporate Projects, and Craig Mayhew, who's a Field Service Director. So thank you everyone and our presenters for taking your time today to talk about this important topic. Moving on to the agenda, basically I'm going to give a quick overview of today's session, and we have broken it up into 3 sections. Section 1 is developing a local assessment system aligned to Common Core state standards. So this reflects the thinking we have at WestEd and the work that we've been doing with our partners throughout the country with local schools and school districts. Section 2 is how Creighton School District's approaching a local assessment system aligned to the Common Core, and they're in the beginning phases of this, but it would be interesting to hear how an inner city school district with lots of challenges, how they're approaching their local assessment system with Common Core. And then Section 3 is using a comprehensive assessment system to meet the assessment instructional challenges for Common Core, and how Assessment Technologies Incorporated, how they view this comprehensive system and how they can help local schools and districts. So that's a brief our agenda for today. And then with the next slide, is your assessment system robust enough? So today's webinar basically serves as a part 2. Last year we gave a webinar called Building a Rigorous Curriculum with Common Core State Standards, and our Alamosa friends are with us today, and they presented on their approach in Colorado with the Common Core State Standards in ELA and math. And basically the central challenges of the Common Core include the development of a rigorous curriculum, and engaging instructional activities, and a variety of assessments at the classroom, building, and system levels. And teachers must be prepared to challenge students to demonstrate proficiency beyond the next round of standardized assessments. So what does that look like for a local district and a local school? And what we're going to talk a little bit about today is that you should be very familiar with your consortium, either PARCC or Smarter Balanced, and how they're thinking about assessment. And what you want to do is you want to really be familiar with how they're thinking about assessment, and make sure your local policy and your local assessment system mirrors what PARCC or Smarter Balance is calling for. So last year when we presented our model in the development of curriculum units aligned to the Common Core standards, and this is just a brief overview of what we discussed last year, the process that we used was we identified essential and supporting Common Core standards to build a guaranteed and viable curriculum for every single grade level. We clustered those standards into units of study, and then after we developed the units of study and named them, We unpacked the unit clusters. We aligned them to web depth of knowledge and revised Bloom's taxonomy. In the units, we developed enduring understandings, essential questions, academic vocabulary, learning targets, and criteria for success. And then finally, as we developed these units, and we talked about last year, is how do we align the proper instructional materials for engaging instructional lesson plans. So once you've completed this alignment work in your curriculum, how should you think about a comprehensive local assessment system? And that really is the focus of our webinar today. So how should we think about our local assessment system so it really does mirror what Smarter, Balanced, and PARCC is calling for in your individual states? So we can go right to the next slide, Julie.
Thanks. That's slide 13.
Yep. And what we want to make sure, and what I'd like you to think about today, as you listen to each different section, section 1, 2, and 3, what can be the major takeaway to help you inform some of your thinking around developing a local assessment system? So here are some good takeaways I want you to think about as we're going through the webinar today. Is you want to make sure your assessments are fully engaged students in cognitively complex tasks, and both consortiums are really calling for that. So how do you build your local system around that idea? Your assessment system will require short, medium, and long cycle assessments. So Bob's going to talk about this in section 1, is thinking about the cycles of assessment and how does your local system fit in with the cycles of assessment. And point 3 is instruction and assessment must fully engage students in cognitively challenging tasks. So not only do we want to see their conceptual thinking, how do we access their justification and their reasons around thinking? So those are the 3 things I'd like you to think about today as we're going through the 3 sections of the webinar. So I'm going to move this over to Bob, who's going to introduce section 1 on developing a local assessment system and the experience that we have at WestEd and the work that we're doing with districts and schools to kind of think about this local assessment system and how to build it.
Thank you so much, Joe. This is Bob Rosenfeld in Nevada, and I'm sitting here with Liz Jameson, and we will be sharing this portion of the presentation. Next slide. You will see a question here. Thank you to all of you who responded to this same question on the pre-webinar survey. But we just wanted to get a quick take regarding those people who are on the call today. And to clarify that what we're asking here is where you are in the of incorporating an assessment system aligned to the Common Core state standards. So this is separate from the previous question, which asked about where you are in terms of looking at the standards, choosing the standards. This is aligning assessments to the Common Core standards. Exploration being the stage at which you've just started to look at the different options that are available. Installation, you've chosen something and started to train people around that system. Initial implementation, you've actually started implementing assessments around the Common Core. Full implementation, everybody in your district or your school is implementing Common Core assessments. And innovation is you've actually been doing this for a while and you've started to refine the process. Or not applicable if you're someone who's not in the position of implementing assessments. So please take a moment to respond.
Thanks, Bob. I'm publishing that now, folks. So if you haven't already done so, hit the submit button, and I'll publish that now.
Excellent. Thank you. So as we can see, most people, as we expected, will be on this webinar today because you are at the exploration stage. Some people have begun some implementation. So thank you. That will give us good information for both Liz and myself and the other presenters later in this webinar so that we can, in fact, modify our instruction. This little poll right here was a formative assessment that we'll be talking more about later. Next slide.
So that's slide 16 if you're just following along with the PowerPoint only.
So, of course, as Joe was referring to, everybody's wondering, what are the implications for themselves? What's coming from PARCC? What's coming from Smarter? And really, what should they start doing now to get ready? But before we can talk about what you should start doing now to get ready, we'd like to establish some of the foundations that were behind this whole Common Core movement, behind the assessment, and the foundational piece behind the assessment model that's being used by PARCC and by Smarter. So I'm going to hand things over to Liz Jameson, who is going to answer some of those questions for us. Next slide.
Thanks, Bob. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is this assessment triangle. So where this assessment triangle comes from is the National Research Council in 2001 released a report called Knowing What Students Know, which was based on a 3-year study of assessments in the United States. And it outlined some recommendations for assessments to allow teachers, schools, districts, and even states to better assess student learning. So what the National Research Council recommended is designing assessments around 3 interconnected foundations, which represent the 3 corners of the triangle. So those are cognition, observation, and interpretation. So the cognition corner, the bottom corner, refers to what students are expected to learn, as well as how they will learn what they're expected to learn. And importantly, theories of learning, or how students gain knowledge over time, are included in the assessment triangle, which means that curriculum, instruction, and assessment, all linked to theories of learning, can be vital components of an aligned system. The observation corner refers to the observable tasks students can perform in order to make what they know visible to us. And then the interpretation corner represents the parameters around which the data collected from an assessment are interpreted. So methods of interpretation vary based on who's giving the assessment and what the purpose of the assessment is. For example, for large-scale assessments, the interpretation chosen clusters of standards and what we can learn about trends in student performance within those reporting categories. For smaller scale assessments, interpretation may be based on individual student performance on tasks aligned to individual standards or even parts of standards. So the fundamental principle behind evidence-based design is the connection between the 3 corners of this triangle. And when we look at this triangle with the Common Core state standards, because of the increased rigor of the standards, we need to make sure that the assessment tasks we create will actually allow us to observe whether students have learned what the standards require of them. And if not, where in the learning progression did their understanding break down? So for many of the Common Core state standards, both in ELA and in math, we're seeing a need to design assessment tasks that go beyond the multiple choice level because in some cases, in many cases, the multiple choice questions alone won't allow us to get enough information about, for example, how a student is solving a problem or analyzing a text, or where within those processes student understanding is breaking down. So the most important thing, and honestly the really great thing about this assessment triangle, is that theories of learning are an integral part of the assessment system, which allows us to deliberately design an aligned system of curriculum, instruction, and assessment that centers around the ways students gain knowledge over time.
Thank you so much, Liz, for that wonderful overview of this. As is always the case in education, we have to at one point go from theory to action. And that is exactly what PARCC and Smarter have begun, and that we hope to help you think about what you can do at your school or your district level, what you can begin. So let's look quickly at PARCC and think about those 3 corners of the triangle that Liz was referring to. What both PARCC and Smarter will provide for us are the tools to allow us to observe what students are learning and to move beyond the multiple choice. What we'll see in both PARCC and Smarter, if you look on the right-hand side of this slide, what they call the required assessments, there are both performance-based and end-of-the-year assessments. The end-of-the-year assessments will be computer-based for both Smarter and PARCC, and will be mainly multiple choice. But there will also be performance-based assessments taking place. So we'll be able to see in multiple ways how students are progressing and making sure that the learning progressions are taking place. If you look farther to the left, you'll see that assessments will take place during the year so that we can observe growth and have an opportunity to interpret that growth in terms of the student learning and an ability to take action immediately. Next slide, please.
So for those following along, we're now moving to slide 19.
you will see that the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium system is very similar. Some differences are that they have a computer adaptive assessment with a retake option, meaning that as the assessment is administered by the computer, it will actually adjust to the student's responses. Of course, they also include the performance tasks, and as is the case with PARCC, they include interim assessments that are optional, but that will give teachers information throughout the school year. And what we encourage schools and school districts to do is to use those interim assessments and to go beyond them to find other ways to observe students' learning. And so if you go to the next slide, please, you will see this comparison chart between PARCC and Smarter. And this is, rather than, I'm not seeing the next slide, Julie.
It's up there, Bob. It's number 20.
Okay, great. Thank you. Rather than focusing on the differences between these, you can go back to the archive and or your PDF and read these later. I'd like to focus on the similarities, the most important one being this philosophy of growth. So it's no longer a fixed mindset or a fixed theory of students' knowledge, skills, or intelligence, but rather a growth model that both of these are built upon. And the other piece I want to emphasize is that both consortia will be providing teachers, schools, and school districts with the digital libraries that will be very useful for them to go beyond the long cycle and assessments and to start providing true medium cycle assessments that we'll be talking more about in a moment. Next slide, please.
It's there.
What we see here was put out by Smarter, and of course, as its name implies, a balanced assessment system. But it really applies to the model that we're proposing that all schools and school districts take on. And that is to have a true balanced system, you need to go beyond the summative assessments occurring towards the end of a school year or towards the end of a quarter to incorporate interim assessments that take place more frequently, but even more importantly, at the shortest time frame, making sure that there are assessment practices taking place during lessons. We need all three time frames to show up in our curriculum and in our instruction. The names that we give to these, next slide.
This is slide 23 for those following along.
The names that we give to these three time frames of assessment are the long, medium, and short cycle. Long cycle is what most of us are accustomed to from the state. So your end of the year state assessment. One of the uses for these, obviously, is summative data. It gives us good information about how students did. What it doesn't give us is very good information about how to help students in the now, in the present. Even when we have it happening at a quarter or at a semester, it still is not as useful in informing instruction as the next time level down, which is the medium cycle. This is where we're talking about instructing for a week, 2 weeks, up to 4 weeks, having an immediate assessment within an instructional unit or between instructional units when we can take immediate action. So the medium cycle lends itself to that immediate action. But even more immediate than the medium cycle is the short cycle. And here is what teachers need to do in terms of day by day, minute by minute, moment by moment within their lessons to find out what students are getting, what they're not getting, so they can take immediate action during the course of the lesson. Now, in any kind of assessment, we need to make sure that we have some key characteristics. Next slide. What you see here are the 6 key characteristics of effective assessments. Instead of reading them to you off of this slide, I'm going to have Liz speak to the implications of these 6 characteristics as they apply to the medium cycle. So those assessments that are taking place from the 1 to 4 week time frame. So if you could go to the next slide, and Liz will speak to us about the implications of these 6 characteristics, which are repeated but in clear reference to the medium cycle.
Okay, thanks, Bob. So I'm going to talk about these characteristics actually in groups of 2. So the first 2 characteristics go back to what Joe was talking about earlier with the curriculum design, but I'm going to try to explain how the curriculum design relates to the 3 corners of the assessment triangle that I discussed earlier. So first of all, we want to prioritize content prior to developing assessments or to planning instruction. So before we help districts develop any assessments at all, we lead them through a process to define standards-based units of study that will be the foundation of this integrated system of curriculum and assessment. And so this system of curriculum and assessment, when complete, will represent each of the points of the assessment triangle: cognition, observation, and interpretation. So the first portion that we believe is important to develop is related to the cognition corner of the triangle. And in it, we help schools and districts develop a list of key essential standards and supporting standards. And so from this prioritized list, we know what standards we will then link our assessments to. Then we want to define targets directly from the prioritized standards. So in the process of defining what students need to learn, we apply what we know about how students learn. So we help districts create standards-based units of study, as Joe mentioned earlier, that are created by grouping standards into content clusters that can then be taught as interrelated sets of concepts rather than as isolated skills. And for each unit, teachers define the enduring understandings that link these concepts together so that when teachers plan lessons for the units, they can concentrate on helping students have transferability between topics in one content area and hopefully even between content areas. So this concept of transferability is so important with the Common Core State Standards because in ELA, integration of skills from different strands is a primary focus, while in math, conceptual understandings of topics is a focus. So then we want to consider specifically what you want to know about your students' learning. So from the standards and from these enduring understandings, we define success criteria that outline not only what students should be able to do, but how well they should be able to do it. So we essentially define levels of proficiency. And then from these success criteria, we can actually develop the assessments and parameters for interpreting the assessments that will give us that complete picture of student learning across a learning progression. So the next two characteristics are regarding actually creating the assessments. And so what we want to do is use a range of items at different depth of knowledge levels. So part of getting a complete picture is making sure that we use a variety of item types and items at different depths of knowledge levels. We go through a process where we align the criteria for success to different COK levels or New Bloom's levels or both so that we can make sure we assess the target at the appropriate level of cognitive complexity. Using items with a range of DOK levels can be used to get more specific targeted information about what students know and are able to do and what they still need to know and be able to do. So this essentially helps us align all three corners of the triangle. We want to then, using different item types and authentic prompts, we want to be able to use the assessments to interpret as clearly as possible what students know and where their understanding breaks down. So we recommend using a variety of items and item types, both so that students get a chance to show their understanding in various ways at various levels, but also to present some real-world situations to students. And very importantly, we take into account closely what we know about PARCC and about SMARTER and the fact that responding to multiple choice questions only in both ELA and math will not be enough to show proficiency. The type of understanding the standards require students to demonstrate is not accessible solely through multiple choice items. So we're helping districts develop more constructive response and in some cases more performance task items. The last two characteristics are about actually are about utilizing the assessments. Let me back up there. In terms of actually developing the assessments, we also adhere to considerations of universal design, so essentially making the assessments as accessible as possible to as wide a range of students as possible. The last two characteristics are about utilizing the assessments. So we want to make sure that the expectations are transparent through the cycle so that what the teacher expects the students to learn or be able to do or produce should be communicated to the students, hopefully as modeling or model products, and then making the results transparent after the assessment also, giving the students the results of the assessment or even having students score their own work. In terms of the last characteristic, making the assessments meaningful and flexible, we want to assess at important points during the unit so we predefine what the important assessments are either using a standard by standard approach or an approach in which important junctures of learning are defined and assessments are given at those junctures. And we want to allow some flexibility in there also, so allow teams to determine when within a unit to assess. It's important to allow teachers some flexibility within the unit so they can judge based on their short cycle formative assessment, which Bob is going to discuss in just a moment here, where their students are and when they're ready for that medium cycle assessment. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Bob, who's going to talk about the short cycle assessment.
So
Thank
Bob,
you so much.
Time check. We're on time here, so we have only a minute or two left. Thank you.
Yes, that will be sufficient. Thank you. So, yes, we know, of course, teachers need to work together collaboratively around assessment, but we also know that most teachers spend most of their time inside their four walls with their students. So we need to make sure that these same 6 characteristics that Liz spoke to at the medium cycle apply to the short cycle. We need to let students in on all the wonderful work that occurred amongst the adults. We need to make sure that students know the why behind the instruction taking place. Why is that the most important instruction? Students need to know the goals that are set for the learning for each and every lesson. We need to make sure that we are observing students during lessons to make sure that the learning taking place is rigorous and that students are, in fact, understanding the learning. We need to scaffold for English learners and learners with other learning differences to make sure that they are receiving the instruction. We need to make sure that students learn to get to the metacognitive level to set their own goals and to be able to use information and feedback from the teacher and from assessments to determine where they are in their own learning progression. And we need to engage students in meaningful conversations around their own learning so that they are part of the learning. The learning isn't simply being pushed at them. So what I'd like for you to think about now, next slide please, is in terms of your own current approach to assessment in your school district or in your school or in your classroom, which of these 3 cycles, the short cycle, the medium cycle, the long cycle, currently is being implemented the most and providing the best information for learning. So please take a moment to respond to this poll.
Thanks, folks. We'll give you another 10 seconds. I see that 50% of the folks in the call have, in the webinar, have answered. If you're just on the call only with the PDF, you can send comments or questions to eventhelp@wested.org. Bob, I'll publish that for you now.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So as we see, most people are feeling that the medium cycle is providing them with the most amount of information. The short cycle leading right after that. So thank you. That will give us a good information as we hear from the presenters later today. That will help them to address some of the issues around the medium and the short cycle. Next slide. What I'd like to do, Julie, now is to go to the review and reflect section.
Okay. We're on slide 28, so we're just taking a short break to see, Joe, did you see questions or comments that we would like to address to Bob and Liz for this piece? And if you're on the call, you can type it into the chat. I'm also going to push out an open response. I see one question in there, Bob, from Michelle. How do you suggest groups of teachers develop medium-level constructed responses and or performance tasks?
Well, our general recommendation is that teachers begin by putting together units of instruction that are aligned to the Common Core standards, and then going through a system of unpacking those standards, looking for the enduring understandings, looking at the levels on DOK, that is depth of knowledge, looking at the level on Bloom's taxonomy, the revised Bloom's, and then using that to determine, and then looking at resources that are available for assessment, and then using that to determine what assessment or assessments would best serve the need for that particular standard or for that particular unit.
Joe, do you see any questions that came into the chat as people are typing in any quick questions or comments they have on the information that Bob and Liz just shared?
Yeah, Bob, I have a quick question for you. What should schools and districts do with their teachers after the medium cycle assessments? What action should be required after they look at the assessment so it doesn't remain summative?
Right. We need to make sure that there's a system in place for teachers to collaborate around that data. It's given different names in different schools, but the idea is that teachers need to look at the data to find out what students got, what they didn't get, and what are the implications for that. So we often help schools set up data team meetings where they look at misconceptions in student learning, gaps in student learning that come out of the assessments, and then help them put together reteach lessons or enrichment lessons that will help them move students forward in those skills.
Thank you. Joe, did you see any other questions you'd like to direct Joe to Bob or Liz right now?
I didn't look at the chat here, so I'm just looking at it right now. There was one question on the growth model, Bob, that you mentioned earlier. And how is PARCC and Smarter Balance looking at the growth model? What do you mean by that?
What we mean is that we'll be able to measure both during a school year and between school years students' growth in a particular area. What we don't know is how states will use that information in terms of accountability models. Our hope is that states will also take on the growth model in looking at scores for students and for schools.
So, Bob, I'm just going to quickly publish the poll that people have been filling in the form and ask you to pick one, or Liz to pick one from that choice that just came up. One or two, and the time allotted. There's one question about prioritizing standards.
What would this just do? Well, Joe, did you want to talk about how people get professional development for their staff on site?
I'd say at the end of the webinar, we're going to post how you can get in touch and contact us if you're interested in any more information or if you're interested in any professional development.
Right, and I'll just take one more question. So you'll go over that at the end. The difference people ask between formative, benchmark, and summative. Well, it's really the difference between formative and summative. A benchmark can be used in a formative sense. What we mean by formative is that it informs instruction. The purpose for giving the assessment is to find out where students are so that we can make immediate adjustments to help the students. Versus summative is we have finished the instruction. We don't plan to work with those students with that skill any further. At least those particular teachers don't. Somebody in the future might. So we are looking to see what learning took place, but we're done with the instruction. Formative is when the instruction is still taking place. So benchmarks can sometimes fall in the middle. If it's used to inform future instruction during that school year, it can take on a formative sense. Most benchmarks, however, take place too far into the long-term cycle, too far out of the medium cycle to truly be formative in nature.
Julia, just responding to a quick question, what should districts do to assess English language learners?
Definitely. We have one more minute left, so perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to post on the webinar, we'll post it at the end. There's an article from the National Association of Secondary School Principals. It does a pretty good job. It's by Rhonda Coleman and Claude Goldenberg, and it's called The Common Core Challenge for ELLs, and it does a really nice job on how districts and schools should think about their ELL population around the Common Core Challenge and the assessment challenge for them. So we'll post that up on the webinar so people can read it.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I think if you keep the questions coming to the chat, I think Bob and Liz are going to be around. Correct, Bob? Can you still review the chat?
Yes, I will be here. Liz needs to return to a training where, in fact, teachers are being trained on everything
we want to thank Liz. Thank you, Liz, for taking time out of your busy schedule. And we'll just now move on. Thank you all. We'll be coming back and having a break. Now we're moving on to Section 2. And so, folks, thank you so much. And I'll push out the slides for you to begin the second part of this piece. And Joe, do you want to do a quick introduction again for Liz?
Yes. Lynn Spiller works at the Creighton School District. We've actually been a partner with Lynn and her school district for the last 4 years. And She'll give you a quick little synopsis of it, but it's been an exciting partnership in an urban school district that had an urgent matter where we had to come in and do some work with them around curriculum and assessment and realignment and thinking about student intervention. So it's my privilege to introduce Lynn. And Lynn, thank you for taking your time with us today.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, you're on. Yes, you are on. And we're on
great.
slide 31, about to move now to the quick poll for you, correct?
Yes. Hello, my name is Lynn Spiller, and I've worked in Creighton School District as the Director of Research and Eval for 12 years. And I noticed somebody had a comment there that said, gee, is this a monumental task? And yes, it is a monumental task. But what we have to do is, just like teachers, we have to chunk and chew. So I just want to describe our district a little bit. Creighton is an elementary district. That's K-8 in Central Phoenix. The urban center here is about 1 million people, but we're not alone in the Valley of the Sun. We're surrounded by 3 million people. So like most of you, our goal is to empower students to contribute globally with excellence. And so we'd like you to tell us a little bit about your students. So we'll move to the poll. And on the poll, we'd like to know, what is the percentage of minority students in your district?
Thanks, folks. If you could just do the multiple choice, we'll give 30 seconds for that.
So moving on to
And let me just publish that for you. So, folks, I'm just going to publish that. So if you haven't hit the submit button, thank you. I see that we have 74% of folks that did. So, Lynn, I'm just publishing that. You should see it on your screen now. Wow, 29% said it's greater than 75%. 26%. So, thank you.
So Creighton School District is an urban district, much like the participants, with demographics that historically correlate to low student achievement. As you can see from the graphs, and Julie, can you move on to slide 33?
Yes, it's there. Thank you. It might just take a little time to show up, so if you just keep talking, I'll just keep showing it.
As you can see from these graphs, we have high minority, primarily students who are Hispanic, where English is a second language. We have high mobility. It can be up to 50%. And we have high numbers of students who participate in free and reduced lunch programs. So Creighton School District has struggled in the past to make adequate yearly progress for the federal system and to be labeled appropriately or acceptably in the Arizona accountability system that here in Arizona is called AZ Learn. In 2008, in response to these problems, Creighton School District became partners with Ellis Center for Educational Excellence and WestEd to implement the Moving Up project that includes many district and site level initiatives that are rooted in research to improve failing schools. The district leadership team participated in all the appropriate steps to identify the needs of the district and the site. We completed a very robust needs assessment. We developed targeted initiatives to intervene at the district site and classroom level, and we developed action plans for implementation, including communication tools to communicate the vision, professional development to increase our administrators and teachers' skills and resources to implement the initiatives, and we identified incentives for administrators, teachers, and students. We developed program evaluations to determine the effectiveness of the initiatives quarterly and annually at the district site and classroom level. So if you can see, it can be quite monumental. So moving to the next slide, we just want to show you some of the results of this partnership. We've been in the partnership with WestEd and Ellis. We're now in the 4th year. Before 2008 in the Common Core standards, Creighton struggled to keep student achievement on a positive trend. With our partnership with WestEd and Ellis, Creighton School Districts have demonstrated accelerated achievement in reading. These graphs describe the percentage of students with proficiency reading on the Arizona Instrument to Measure Standards, which we call the AIMS test. The first graph compares Creighton School District, all students' proficiency in reading, to the state of Arizona. So you can see that our line is below the state of Arizona. Although we have historically performed far below the state, we are on a positive trend to match the state's proficiency in 2013, and that'll be a loud celebration when it happens. On the next slide over, on the next graph over, you can see our third grade students are 92% Hispanic. They are struggling to learn English and demonstrate proficiency in English. With our new initiatives in place, we are seeing a dramatic change in student achievement for this fragile group of students. These students have increased proficiency over the last 6 years by 21%. Now that the standards and assessments are changing, we are preparing for the new curriculum because we want to keep on track with these improvements. Next slide. In the rest of my presentation, I'm probably going to repeat words that you heard Joe Sassone say and Bob Rosenfeld and Liz, because I am going to be repeating some of the actions that are really important to get this growth. With WestEd and NELA support, we use the following strategies to accelerate our students' achievement. We adopted a continuous improvement plan model for district improvement, and part of this plan is to align our curriculum, our instruction, and our assessments. We identified the guaranteed and viable curriculum, which meant that our teachers selected the essential standards to which they thought it was necessary to teach. We provided the curriculum of the common district adopted materials to all teachers. We developed district common pacing guides. We developed medium cycle assessments. We call them common formative assessments. We have 2 forms of each assessment, an A and a B, in reading and mathematics. We developed quarterly benchmark assessments in reading and mathematics aligned to our common formative assessments. Then we developed action plans following each quarterly benchmark assessment by identifying students who need a change in their intervention plan to accelerate achievement. So the next slide.
There's a quick question. Would you tell us more about the 2 forms of common assessment that you used? And that's coming up, correct, Lynn?
Yes.
Thank you.
On our common formative assessments, the teachers develop a common formative assessment aligned to a specific essential standard or an essential performance objective. On that common formative assessment, there are 5 items per PO, and so it's a very quick assessment to determine if the 2 students are at mastery. We define mastery as 4 out of 5 correct on our formative assessments, or 80%. We have 2 forms, A and B, so all children take Form A. Students who do not master A will be retaught for the next 2 weeks. Then they will take the Form B assessment, and then we look to see if we've reached our projected goal is all students, or 80% of our students be at mastery at the end of our cycle of instruction. So now we're on slide 36. During the school year, we have provided an infrastructure of support for the professional learning communities that work. Each grade level team have common planning time during each school day scheduled in the site master course schedule. And I just want you to know that's a really hard job, is making everybody agree to a master course schedule. The first planning period during the week is devoted to initial planning facilitated by a site instructional coach. The second planning period during the week is devoted to the data analysis of the common formative assessments, working to identify each group of students, what their learner-centered problem was, why they didn't demonstrate mastery, assign teachers to that group, then plan that reteach or enrichment lesson each day for the 2-week period, and then this meeting is facilitated by a student achievement teacher. This work has resulted in students scoring at greater than 75% on our whole instructional cycle, on our medium, that has led to our increased rate of performance. Next slide, please.
So this is slide 37, correct, Lynn?
Yes. So this was the work that we completed on what we call the old standards, and now we're moving to work on the new standards. We don't want our students' growth to decline. We actually want to accelerate them. So we put a lot of thought into how we're going to implement the new Common Core standards. So following the work being completed during the 2011 and 12 school year, this slide shows the timeline for the continued work for implementing the Common Core standards in the year 2013-14. We plan to support the development of the Common Core standards at each grade level by training teachers extensively ensuring ownership of the curriculum. Through our previous curriculum work, we have found that it is essential that all teachers be continuously immersed in the materials. The model we use is the continuous improvement model. Each component is reviewed and refined as we receive feedback during development and implementation. Next slide, please.
We're coming up to the poll, correct?
Yes. So we'd like you to respond to this poll. When is your site planning on developing documents and materials for implementing the Common Core standards? So do you have, A is no plans yet, B will be summer workshops, C is school year workshops, D, you've completed the work, or E, not applicable. Okay, so while you're responding to that, we can move on to slide 39.
I actually have to publish it before we move to the next slide. Sorry. There's some question here, and I think we'll get to some of this, but one of the questions was, were you able to get adequate instructional minutes with 2 planning periods per week?
Our district added 40 minutes of increased instructional time to our professional day. And with that instructional time, it allowed us to have the reteach enrichment period for all students. The teachers have common planning time. It's during a specials period, and our specials are art, music, PE, and technology. And so we had to do a lot of work the previous year in order to get our infrastructure in place to allow the increased instructional minutes for our students.
Thank you. And I just published the poll for you, Lynn.
Okay, so so the highest, you're all planning to do it during the year workshops, just like we are. We're probably all working under budget constraints. So moving on to the next slide.
That's slide 39?
Yes. We are pleased that we have 2 more years before full implementation must take place, but we have no time to waste. This slide describes our timeline for the implementation of the Common Core standards. The implementation of these standards will require many new documents and assessments. These new standards will not only require changes in curriculum documents and calendars and medium cycle assessments, but a whole totally new classroom delivery model. So in order to have a change in that delivery model, on the next slide you will see, the Creighton School District is developing an action plan that will identify key components for a smooth transition to implementation of the Common Core standards in each classroom. We are planning on integration of the professional development within a unit with frequent coaching. Each teacher will receive model products included in each unit with data meetings devoted to analyzing student work samples. We are planning on revising math curriculum and teacher instructional strategies on how to teach conceptually. This will include collecting student work, and a dialogue will follow among teachers about what they see as students are learning. Okay, on the next slide. In order to prepare for Common Core standards, we need to prepare an action plan to identify personnel, resources, time, and place for all these workshops. Previously, Creighton has completed this curriculum instruction and assessment work during summer workshops with small groups of grade-level subject area teachers. But this year, due to our budget constraints, we are beginning this work during the school year on our short day Wednesdays. These Wednesdays release students 2 hours early to provide the teachers with frequent and focused professional development opportunities. Summer workshops are usually made up of 10 days with 6 hours in each day, which is a total of 60 hours of work by the teachers. But our schedule right now, we have 10 days during the year, 2-hour workshops, which is a total of 20 hours. We realize this isn't enough time, but we'll take as much time as we can get. Our focus for 10 of these workshops are, first is to identify the essential standards. Second is to develop our units and unpack these standards. Third is develop our medium cycle assessments and align with our misconception documents, and develop calendars and pacing guides to be piloted in the next school year. So that brings up our next poll.
It does, yes.
Which of these steps would be most technically difficult for your teachers? Would it be identifying the standards and developing units, or developing calendars in our pacing guides, or developing the medium cycle assessment? So take a moment to take the poll.
We have lots of questions in chat. We'll be coming up to a break soon and addressing some of those.
Alrighty.
So I'm actually, someone wrote, what are misconception documents? I'm not sure.
Oh, that is a new term that WestEd and Creighton have been working on with our teachers. When we design our common formative assessment, every distractor to every item, so every possible answer to every prompt on a common formative assessment, we try to make it be diagnostic. So our misconception document tells our teachers what misconception might a student have if they answered a wrong answer on a common formative assessment. It's been really sort of fun to take a traditional common item on an assessment and turn it into an item that actually diagnoses why a student might have answered the wrong question. For our teachers, it's really helped them to try to get into the minds of students in order to determine what it is they're thinking when they give a wrong answer. So we always work on our common formative assessments and our misconception documents at the same time so they align.
Thank you. I just published the poll for you, and you can see developing medium cycle assessment seems to be the steps that are technically most difficult for folks working with their teachers.
Julie, this is Joe. I just wanted to add to that, just looking at the poll where people are thinking about the medium cycle assessment. That's really what we're talking about on the webinar today. And I just want to, there was a question about what's the difference between an A and a B that Lynn stated, and she gave an answer. But basically what we ask is that when we design these medium cycle assessments that take place every week to 2 weeks, that they're purposefully designed to look at student learning so we can move learning forward after we look at students' misconceptions or misunderstandings around their learning. The B is specifically designed as a parallel assessment to the initial assessment, so we can, again, get a quick look on how students are doing. And the key here as we move to Common Core, what I want everyone to think about is as you design your local medium cycle assessments, you need to move to a blend of assessment types. It cannot just be multiple choice. It needs to be, if you use multiple choice, you need to make sure that your items are aligned with depth of knowledge, web depth of knowledge, and then also you use a blend of open responses with rubrics to reveal conceptual understanding, look at student reasoning, and to make sure they're cognitive complex tasks. And then also we call for performance tasks that students, because in both consortiums they're going to have to do complex tasks. And then also to look at student model products where we're actually looking at student work. So I just wanted to clear that up since it came out so high on the poll of what we're really calling for here is districts to think about this blended model.
Thanks, Joe. I really appreciate you jumping in. That's great. And folks, thank you for the chat. I think it really helps us clarify as we're going along, like Joe and Lynn and all are doing as you type in the chat, and we're monitoring that. So thank you so much. Lynn,
Okay,
should I just move on to slide 43 for you?
Yes, thank you. It's really important for our district that all of our teachers participate in the workshops developing the new units and the medium cycle assessments, because if not all teachers are participating, they might not actually understand the construction. So right now our teams of teachers are presently constructing their units. They're grouping appropriate essential standards and supporting standards into units. And on the slide, I've actually put a graphic of what our units look like, and you may download that graphic from the website, and it's under downloads for your own use from the website for this webinar. So each individual component as we develop these units has a PowerPoint presentation that's been previously developed that contains a description and multiple examples to aid teachers in the unit development. Each component is essential for full understanding for how to teach the essential standard and how to monitor student learning. The following is a description of our units components that were developed during our work with our teachers. So there's a unit overview, which gives a concise description of each unit. Essential questions and big ideas bring a laser focus to the teaching. Concept skills and key vocabulary aid teachers on lesson planning and instructional scaffolding. Our learner targets and our criteria for success align what is taught to how we will know what students have learned during the lesson. We must align what is taught to what is assessed for the acceleration of our student achievement. So on the next slide, slide 44, each team develops a year-long pacing guide that indicates the dates of all initial instruction and medium cycle assessments for the grade level subject area or content area. This slide graphic may be downloaded from the website under download for your own use for you to view what our calendars look like. Our current pacing is designed to test 2 performance objectives each 2-week period. We don't know yet if we'll keep the same pace for our Common Core standards. We haven't quite got to our calendars yet. Don't forget to add all holidays and other days off at school. Also indicate quarterly or long-term assessment dates on the calendar. Okay, on the next slide. This graphic shows what our short medium cycle assessment might look like. After the development of our medium cycle assessment, each grade level and subject area team will evaluate each assessment developing the following components: categorical concurrence or content validity of items to the selected standards. Each team evaluates the passage quality for lexile level, text complexity, and cognitive demand. Each team will review the documents for format, typos, alignment of question, format to state examples, and sufficient assessment items for content range on the standards. During the year, each medium cycle assessment and quarterly benchmark assessment is evaluated for psychometric validity. We always check for sufficient number of items per test per essential standard or performance objective. We check for only one right answer, numerical rubrics for scoring guides for performance assessment, and an efficient method for data collection. You may view this graphic on the download area for the website under downloads for your own use.
And also, Lynn, we did attach these as a part of the PDF package. So if you've got that, they're at the end in the appendix. Thank you so much. And we thank you for sharing those.
So I just want to talk a little bit about what our workshops are looking like now. We're currently running 18 simultaneous grade level subject area meetings, which are monitored for teacher attendance and teacher productivity. Each grade level and subject area curriculum meeting is facilitated by a team of trained staff members. Prior to the workshop, the Creighton School District curriculum and instruction staff members worked with WestEd mentors to develop the training materials and the facilitation for completing these sessions with our teachers. So I know it does seem like a really monumental task to complete this work, but this is the method that Creighton School District's using at this time.
Thank you, Lynn. And we're just coming up for a break, and I know that Joe might jump in again and ask some questions that were coming up in the chat. I know there was lots of different questions out there. So, Joe, would you like to direct those to Lynn, and I'll push out the open response questions, but we'll collect a few more as well during this quick break.
I actually have a question for Bob that relates to what Lynn was just talking about. One of the questions was that there was an assumption that all the Common Core standards are essential. So can you respond to that, Bob?
Thank you. Can you repeat that? I was unmuted.
Sure. We all assume that all the Common Core standards are essential. So if you can respond to that comment, that was a question that was on the chat.
Yes. Yes. That is one way to look at it, that they are all essential. In fact, both PARCC and SMARTER say that all standards are eligible for assessment. So in that sense, they are essential. But in the sense of would they all be the focus, the instructional focus for a unit, the answer is no. There are certain standards which serve as that focal point for the unit, and then the rest of the standards can serve to support those standards. So it's the process of choosing the essential standards is still applicable to the Common Core.
And then, Bob, just another question, and maybe, Lynn, if you want to speak a little bit to this, too. I'm going to ask Bob to go first, but there was a question here from Priscilla. It says, we have been giving cumulative benchmark exams every 6 weeks and smaller summative assessments every week. What problems do you see with this model?
Well, what I hear in that question is that the ones given weekly were summative. So it goes back to the discussion we had earlier, what's the difference between summative and formative. If those assessments that are given weekly are used in a formative sense, and teachers get together, collaborate around those results, and take immediate action based upon those results, there's nothing wrong with that model. If, however, that model is simply giving the assessments, for example, for a grade, and the instruction moves on regardless of how students did, that's an issue. I'm not sure that's what she was saying, but that is my take on that. If it's used in a formative sense, sounds great.
I do agree with Bob on that. At Creighton School District, we had to actually carve out an intervention period for our students. All students are regrouped, and they either receive a reteach period if they didn't reach mastery on our medium cycle assessments, or they receive an enrichment period during that time, and all students are participating. And that was really a difficult thing to get implemented, but the results from it have been just overwhelming, and now all of our teachers support this additional time and tasks that requires for them to do. And I just think it brings up the point that it doesn't do any good to test kids if we don't do something with the test results.
And that goes back to the question earlier, thank you, Lynn, about are there essential standards? If we were to assess every single standard at the level of depth that Lynn is talking about and have these collaborative meetings around them, we still wouldn't have enough time in a school year, which is why it's still important to find those, whether we call them guaranteed standards, essential standards, focal standards, we still need to decide what those points are, what the particular skill and knowledge that we should spend the most time, the most emphasis instructing and assessing.
Thank you. Well, I'm just going to publish the questions that came up in the open response for you to also select. Joe, back to you to decide which ones probably in the short time we have are best to do. Thank you.
Lynn, do you want to answer the first question?
It says, Lynn, right? Lynn, are you using ATI items?
Yeah.
Yes. So we do use ATI for our assessment system. We do use their formative test bank area. What's really nice about ATI is it's very quick to search and for teachers to look at the items. Since we are doing, as I said, sort of diagnostic distractors with our misconception documents, we often do revise them so that we get clearer answers for our distractors. We also add any other assessments that are available that are available online or teachers find. We always ask teachers to bring in passages and items that they think would be helpful because we really want our teachers to be involved in the assessment. And ATI allows us to input formative items that come from our teachers also.
There has been a question about, do these assessments work well with proficiency-based teaching and learning? Does anyone want to jump in with that one?
I didn't see that.
It's the last one in the list up there.
That's basically what we do. I mean, it's a mastery. We use a mastery learning model, and a lot of the work by Thomas Gusky with that. And what we're doing is we're purposefully measuring mastery, and then we're looking at student misconceptions and how do we move the learning forward. So what's really important with the mid-cycle assessments is you need to do an intervention and, like what Bob said, an immediate action to figure out what are the misunderstandings that students have, what are they struggling with conceptually, so then you can differentiate and adapt your instruction for a targeted group of students.
Thank you. And there's one question. Someone says that they're in a similar school environment as Creighton, but at the secondary level, and they're wondering about how do you do the assessment around and the intervention around with issues around high mobility and absenteeism. Is that something you want to comment on now, Lynn, or do you want to do that in the chat?
Well, I just wanted to say teachers often will they often have rationales about why their scores would be low. And what we do is we actually delve into the data and we actually look to see, do they actually have that high absenteeism rate, or, and questions like that. Here at Creighton, our absenteeism rate is not really high. We work with our parents to make sure that our students are in school. So I guess we're lucky in that situation in that we're an elementary district and our students do come to school every day. We're very happy about that.
Thank you. Is there one more question?
Actually, I was going to ask Bob to respond to the question is, can you talk about how to unwrap the standards while keeping the rigor intended?
Bob, you're on. *6 to unmute.
Okay. Yes, I am back. Joe, can you repeat that?
Yeah, it was, can you talk about how to unwrap the standards while keeping the rigor intended?
Yes, well, we do that through a process of using both Norman Webb's depth of knowledge. We identify the depth of knowledge for each and every standard, but we go further to say not only what is the depth of knowledge, but we look at the revised Blooms to look at the type of knowledge within the standard and also the cognitive processes within the standard. And then we make sure that both the depth of knowledge and Blooms align with each other as a self-check. So we have teachers go through both processes and then check with each other. We also do a lot of articulation grades above and below to ensure that the level of rigor is appropriate and that the learning progressions are taking place from grade to grade.
Okay, thank you. So without any further ado, I'd just like to go to Section 3. Jason, we want to be responsive, but we also, we're on to Section 3. So Jason, you're on. *6 to unmute your phone. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Julie, and Lynn, Bob, and Joe as well. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, Julie.
Okay, so this is slide number 50. Thank you. The building blocks.
Yes, please. What I'd like to do in this time is focus on some of the practical implications of moving Common Core forward within an individual school district, and build upon some of the work that we've done with Creighton and Wested, which is also occurring in many other districts, and try to point out some lessons learned related to a comprehensive assessment system and the Common Core. From what we can tell at this point, there are really 4 key building blocks in helping districts achieve success in Common Core implementation. The first, of course, is to have a focused implementation, and that implementation needs to occur within an ongoing instructional improvement cycle, similar to the one that was described by Lynn earlier. The second one is also quite key, and we like to think about it as intelligent integration. There are lots of different measures being developed by the consortia. There are lots of different measures being developed by local school districts, but the real issue here is whether or not there's an intelligent integration of those different measures, the data coming out of those measures, and the reports that are being used by the different stakeholders in school districts, and I'll talk about that a bit as well as we go forward. The third, which we believe is an absolute essential for local district implementation of its assessments for Common Core, is an ongoing research program to ensure that, in fact, those instruments are, in fact, reliable and valid. If the instruments are not producing data that can be defensible, then the information you're getting on student mastery for use in instruction and intervention may or may not move you forward. And finally, and this is a big issue for districts, whether in fact the information is actionable. We work with a number of districts who talk about being data rich and implementation poor, and that basically goes to the question of is the data you're getting from your comprehensive assessment system truly providing useful information for instructional decision making. Go ahead, Julie. All right, so on each of those points, the first one, in terms of a focused implementation cycle, it's not all that complicated when you get down to it. Creighton is a great model to look at. You're basically doing 3 fundamental things. You're planning, you're acting, you're evaluating the impact of your actions, and you're adapting. That must be embedded in the implementation of any comprehensive assessment system. Otherwise, there will be a disconnect between what you're trying to accomplish and what you actually do end accomplishing at the end of the road. And I believe we put up some documents on the WestEP site that talk about this in a little more detail. Go ahead, Julie.
So on slide 52, right, Jason?
Yes, please.
Great. There it is.
Okay. The second piece is something that's near and dear to us and the districts, and also highly related to Common Core, whether you're in the Smarter Balance Consortium or the PARCC Consortium. And I put these out there as a couple of questions you might want to think about. The first is, are your Common Core assessments actually integrated with your local district goals, your pacing guides, and your curriculum maps? Most of the assessments that will be coming out of the consortiums are not necessarily going to be paying attention to how you're rolling out your pacing guides and your curriculum maps during the year, and it's critical that your local assessments are doing that. The second critical question has to do with whether or not your assessments are integrated with each other in a way that provide your teachers and your administrators with timely and actionable data so that they can use that both in instruction and enrichment. The third is really more of a psychometric issue for local school districts. Are, in fact, your assessments, in particular your interim benchmarks, your summatives, your pre and your post, Creighton is a good example with its benchmarks, are they, in fact, integrated in ways that actually measure student progress on a common scale? Simply counting up how many things a student got right or having percent score will not be sensitive to student progress or intervention over the course of the school year. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Go ahead, Julie.
So this is slide 53.
Yes,
Thank you.
please.
It's there. Thank you.
Okay. In our work with Creighton and other districts, we like to conceptualize a comprehensive assessment system. It is really moving beyond silos. And what you're looking at here is fundamentally the kinds of tools that should comprise a comprehensive assessment system. And they range from screening instruments all the way up to tools that are actually being used as part of initiatives to support teacher effectiveness, to look at the kinds of things that are going on in Creighton, even to the extent that other assessment tools that might have been developed outside of a technology system, and we basically call that ask assessments, can actually be brought in to that system so that they can be layered with the tools that are currently in a comprehensive system. But the goal here at the end of the day for Common Core is to try to ensure that districts are not trying to implement multiple systems coming out of different areas of the ball field, but have something that's really more integrated. And that's kind of the work we're doing with Wested right now with Creighton. And I guess, Julie, is this where I ask my question?
Yes, you do.
Okay, so
we have a yes/no question.
We do have a yes/no question, which is basically, does your district, if you're looking at this kind of definition of a comprehensive system, have one in place, or are you in progress of getting one in place?
Thank you. Just hit the yes, the check button on the right-hand side. If that's a yes, and I can give you a quick reading. And some person, Jennifer asked for quick clarification of silos. What were you referring to?
Sure. Typically when we, and historically, if you will, in education, districts tend to implement different assessment tools. They could be diagnostic, formative, interim benchmarks, placement tests, even computer adaptive tests. And there are different structures, if you will, that hold these different systems. Because they're coming out of multiple systems rather than one comprehensive system, they're basically in silos. The data exists separate from data coming out of another system. In terms of moving toward a comprehensive system and getting multiple measures, which is key to Common Core, multiple measures of student mastery, you want to be able to collect information from an interim assessment, from a formative assessment, from a final course, and pull that together in a way that gives you a much more holistic picture of student learning.
Just a quick, 20 folks have said 26% of the people on the call have said yes, their district has an integrated comprehensive assessment, and 8 have said no, not yet.
Great, super. All right, so people are moving in the right direction. Okay, we can go ahead on to 54. When we move to the next building block, which has to do with ongoing research, we think that is probably, if not the most, but one of the most important issues that districts will need to grapple with and should come up with solutions for in implementing Common Core assessments at the local level. We're moving in a direction where assessment instruments that are simply generating raw scores or percent correct are not going to be sensitive to measuring growth. And I know there was a question earlier about measuring growth. An earlier question, I think when Bob was presenting, had to do with why we're starting at grade 3. We shouldn't be starting at grade 3. We should be starting at kindergarten. So we should have a comprehensive system in place that actually allows us to measure student growth not only within a school year but across school years, so that intervention and enrichment planning can be more long-term rather than short-term. In the work that we do with Creighton, and actually this is a similar measurement model to what's currently being implemented in statewide assessments now and will be implemented for the Common Core, some of the Common Core assessments, is basically an IRT, or what we call an item response theory model. And what that allows districts to do with their Common Core assessments is, instead of looking at data separately on each test, as you're seeing here, you have a test 1, test 2, test 3. One may be more difficult or less difficult than the other. The items measuring Common Core may be more or less difficult. It's some of the challenges that Wested and Creighton spoke about earlier. With an IRT model in place at the local school district level, you can actually place those assessments and those items on a common scale, and that allows you to measure student progress realistically, not only within a school year across different benchmark assessments, but as well as across school years. And we think implementing an IRT model within a school district is essential for some of these comprehensive assessments. Go ahead to 55, please. Here's an example actually from Creighton. You heard Lynn talk about the medium assessments and the benchmarks. This is actually an example of an IRT approach to validating those tools. I know that was a question, where you're looking at the performance objectives that are being measured in Creighton. This happens to be a 5th grade second quarter benchmark. You'll see POs are occurring multiple times. That's because they're using a more global item array to measure different components of these performance objectives. And next to each one, you're basically seeing IRT data, the likelihood that students who really don't have the ability to do this are guessing, the relative difficulty of the items that are being used to measure each of these standards. We, of course, want to have a broad range of difficulty so that we're sensitive to the broad range of abilities that are found in students, and the item discrimination, which basically gives you a psychometric answer to the validity of the question that is being used to measure the performance objective or standard. And for Creighton, as I think Lynn alluded to, every time they administer one of their benchmark assessments, these item parameters are run with their student population, because for local systems, we're more interested in whether the tests are behaving, if you will, effectively for those students, rather than any normative data at a state or national level, because they're using these for instruction. So I guess it looks like I do need to ask a question here, Julie?
Yes, we just have a quick response. Is a yes-no question again. Thank you, everyone, for doing this. Is item response theory a part of the scoring procedures you use in your local district assessment system? If you could hit the yes, or the check if no, yes, check, no, yes, and the cross for no. Thank you. Some quick questions here. Someone says, boy, you must have a huge data set to run 3PL.
Actually, that's a great question. To run a 3-parameter model, you do need to have a minimum set of numbers. We are fortunate in that we're able to run a 3PL model in most of the districts that we work with. We do store the item psychometrics within an item bank, and we keep a history on these. So when a district is using benchmark assessments, they're getting items that have valid item parameters, all 3. Of course, with smaller samples, one could, in fact, hold constant discrimination parameter and still run those models. But we do work with each district to run those 3PL models as best as we can. But that is a great question.
So quick, 18 have said yes, they're familiar with the term, the item response series is part of their scoring, and 21 knows for those who did their response to the
All right,
poll.
great. So we're halfway there.
Yeah.
It's something people should certainly read up on. It's a very important measurement procedure, and it does allow one to actually measure progress in a way that's going to be meaningful for looking at outcomes. Okay, let's go to 56. I won't spend too much time on this one, but again, it goes back to ensuring that your local system does in fact produce assessments that are reliable and valid. This is just some data that we've generated. Creighton is included in this. It also includes districts that we work with WestEd in terms of doing some of the stuff that Joe and his team are doing at Creighton. The first one basically shows reliability. You kind of always want to ensure that your interim benchmarks, your pre-post, your end of course have high reliability. We generally look at instruments, and this is just a sample of a little under 4,000 assessments we've done, where you're, at least in terms of test length, you're approaching really adequate levels of reliability when your assessments, benchmarks as an example, start to approach about 45 items. The second piece really deals with the ability of your local assessments to forecast performance on the high-stakes tests. And again, this is just some data from about 23 districts with a little under 270 forecasting opportunities. We always want to ensure that we're doing an adequate job in forecasting early on and throughout the school year the extent to which students are going to be on course for doing well on the standards on the high-stakes tests. And then we also recommend that a district have the capability or consult with people that have the capability to run correlations between your local benchmark assessments, as one example, with the state tests. And here's just some example of the work we're doing here. We just ran this on about a little under 600 benchmarks, including Creighton, and we tend to get correlations that generally in the mid-70s to mid-80s, which we're actually we're good with that.
Just to we have 5 minutes left here.
I will move forward.
Thank you.
Okay. What we want to do here is just kind of give you a bird's eye view of some of the reports that really transform the data that you're getting from a comprehensive system directly into actionable information. These are some of the dashboards that Creighton will be using as we go into the 12-13 year. They are configurable dashboards. The goal here is to connect teachers with information immediately and consistently and continuously on not only the extent to which students are maintaining or gaining or losing mastery on the Common Core standards, but also, if you look on the right side here under the Instruction and Performance Tracker, where these standards are being measured. You could see in that column, I know it's a little fuzzy, in a multi-measure system, you always want to be able to account for where the standards were measured. And we also link it directly to instruction so that the teachers can see how often learning opportunities are being provided to the students. These all have drill-down capabilities, but I won't get into them now because of the time constraints we're operating under. You'll also notice that in those states that are implementing educator effectiveness initiatives, we are also providing the teacher with information that will help support her or his own professional development. You can see a little widget there on the teacher proficiency profile. But again, these dashboards are configurable, so a district can pretty much put in there what they want from the system. Go ahead. You go to 58. Okay. This is an example of a configurable dashboard that would be used with Common Core that really is for the administrator. And here they can get a bird's eye view of what's happening in a district, the extent to which students are growing, whether they're meeting their annual measurable objectives, and again, if they're doing anything related to educator effectiveness, the extent to which the district is having an impact on student learning as a part of their educator effectiveness initiative. Julie, go ahead to slide 59.
Lots of people wanting to have this who've got Galileo, wondering if they'll have access to a dashboard like this. I think you could probably answer that in the chat later, right?
Yeah, and the answer is yes. These are the things that we are putting in place now for districts going forward for fall of beginning fall. So the basic answer is yes.
Thank you.
Okay, this is just another example of the report used by Creighton where we're integrating information from multiple systems that can be used to guide instruction. You're seeing in the benchmark summary screen below where 3 benchmark assessments are integrated together to report on student level of not meeting state standards in terms of risk levels. And that's also tied into other reports that provide detailed item analyses for teachers. Again, the goal here is to integrate assessment information both across assessments and over time to give teachers information that they can use in planning, instruction, and intervention. So we can go ahead to 60.
We're there.
Okay. This is just another example of what Creighton is using to provide teachers across school years with information about student patterns of progress. We think it's critical in implementing Common Core that data on student learning be carried with the student across the school years. You're just seeing an example of a 207-08 here, but for a district like Creighton, where they've been implementing the system for, I think, 6 years or so now, a teacher will actually have history over that period of time. And to be sensitive to the multiple sources of data, these kinds of reports do include the formative and benchmark results that Lynn's described, as well as her AIMS data and any other external data that might be useful in helping to track student progress over time. Okay. This is our last slide in this part of the presentation, but I just wanted to give you a kind of a quick picture of what happens in the classroom at the end of the day. What we're trying to do is link student performance and competency on a standard, and you can see here this is a student. It can be a group, it can be a grade, it can be a district, where they are in terms of their mastery of standards, the level of risk they're at in not meeting the standards. And again, this data actually appears at the beginning of the year, so it can be used. That's linked directly to the selection of assignments that can be used to promote mastery, similar to what you're seeing in Creighton in their work with Wested and Ellis, and then linked directly to follow-up formative assessments. Here it's called Quiz Builder, so that there's really a complete cycle that appears just right on a teacher's dashboard. What am I going to plan for? What actions am I going to take in implementing that planning, and how will I evaluate it?
Thank you, Jason. It's always hard being in the last in a busy webinar, so we thank you for hanging in there with us, and thank you all participants. So here's the contact information for Jason and all, and then you can get a link to their website. And we've also made this information available on the Schools Moving Up site where you signed up for this webinar. So I just want to go over before we take any final questions here. For those of you who have to leave us now, thank you for attending this webinar and taking time out of your busy schedule, and thank you to all our presenters. In terms of next steps, all this information is posted on the Schools Moving Up site where you signed up for the webinar, and Joe kindly also sent us the article about English language learners and that overview. We also will have a link where you can contact the local accountability professional development services. Some of you were asking about that, PD, as well as links to our presenters today. And we're going to push out a survey, and that's going to pop up on your screen. But before we do that, we would also like you to type in any final questions and comments into the chat. And could you do that now? We'll ask our presenters to stay on longer and answer some of those for you. But those of you who have to go, we understand, and but we'd like to get your feedback on our presentation. So if the survey covers your screen, you can minimize it by hitting the click button. And we'd ask folks if they have any final questions and comments, I'll be pushing out the form to collect those. And again, we thank you for being on our webinar today. and we'll be posting up the archive and sending out a reminder to all of those who signed up who couldn't come, as well as those who showed up, and give you some more resources. So, Joe, over to you for any final reflections and comments as I also push out the final open response poll.
Well, some final reflections, and we gave a lot of information today, but I think if you kind of just focus on slides 13, where my specific questions at the beginning were, we want to make sure we design local assessments that fully engage students in cognitively complex tasks. And make sure your assessment system at the local level reflects on the cycles of assessment. In the short cycle, what a teacher does minute by minute and day by day, so it's a real change of pedagogy. In the medium cycle, what teachers can do in common or courses can do in common for every week or every other week. And then in the long cycle, with a benchmark, does it really inform teaching and learning? And we want to make sure that the students are really in a challenging situation so we can assess their cognitive demands, their conceptual knowledge. So that's important. And I think if you concentrate on slide 13, slide 22, where we talk about the assessment cycles, and then 17 around the assessment triangle, I think a lot of the information that Jason just presented and Lynn presented and Bob presented will make some sense. So I wish you all luck, and I hope you found this helpful.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Joe, for orchestrating and getting our presenters together. I see there's a question in the chat for you, Bob. Would you like to take it? Would you like me to read it aloud? It's something about SMARTA.
Yes, can you please read it aloud?
Yes, SMARTA has put out draft content and item specs for some grade levels. Do you know if there are plans to release them soon for other grade levels, including HS, high school?
What I've heard, it would be spring or late spring. But those are definitely worth looking at now. They highlight areas that they believe, what we know right now, will be emphasized for the different standards and for the different grades. So what I've heard is late spring. Does anybody else have any other information? Please put it into the chat area.
And I'm just seeing if there's any final other questions. Did any folks, Joe, did you see any that you want to bring up other than the nice summary? A question about ATI unique to this accountability model. That's a question, I think, for you, Jason, quickly.
Yeah. Some of that are in Galileo, and I think I did respond in text, are unique and are patented. We are, in terms of accountability, if you're talking about educator effectiveness, we are indeed using IRT not only for student outcomes, but also for educator outcomes. Most of the legislation related to that does, in fact, require one come up with some psychometrics, and we believe IRT can be very powerful in creating a meaningful link between student outcomes and educator effectiveness that will be beneficial to the teachers. But so some of the work is unique, and they can email me, of course. I think we put up the email address, and I can provide more detail related to that.
Right. Thank you. I'm going to last call. Any final? I just want to publish for you. I know lots of people are leaving, and we'll get the survey data back to you. But thank you, all participants. And just a nice note to end on. We asked, in your role, how will you use the information presented today? So I know some of you are going to ask for more information, and we hope you contact the presenters. I'm just going to publish that because some folks answered to improve student learning skills, and others to inform our assessments and how they can be expanded to meet the implementation of the Common Core standards. So thank you so much, everyone, for being on this call. Thank you, Joe, Bob, Liz, Linda, and Jason. And we really appreciate that all of you, our participants, could take time out of your busy schedule. We invite you to come back and review the archive and then share this information with others, and invite you to give us your feedback. And please come to other Schools Moving Up webinars, and have a great day, and keep up all the wonderful work that you are doing on behalf of our students. So thank you, everybody, and I'm officially ending today's webinar.
Thank you.